Recording in progress.
Lord.
Hey, everybody out there. Welcome back to The Broken Brain. It's me, Dwight, back with you to host and journey through this little look at psychology and culture today that we're going to be getting into. Today's a special, special episode. It's a special, for me, it's a real special honor. I didn't realize until we were just kind of setting up that this is the first time you've talked about this on a podcast, actually. And so Brianna Benjamin, a really good friend, I say friend of the show, one of my favorite things to say, but actually real life friend as well. You and Chris Revill are some of my best podcast friends, if you will, meaning that that's how we met, is through working on podcasts together and working with Let's Chat with Chris Revill. And you were also involved when we were setting up the pilot episode for Selwyn Jones, George Floyd's uncle, and we've been through some things. We worked together a bit, right?
For a couple of years now. It feels like at least 5 years.
Something like that. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And you've also been kind enough to participate in the live events when we did opioid overdose awareness, I should say, the last couple of years, and to really promote and share some things too. Bree works in a lot with the field of podcasting and with people, helping people to get, I know you do other things too, but helping people to get things put together for promotion and materials. And I know personally that you've really even donated a lot of that skill to help a lot of people who were in need, for even less than you maybe should have gotten paid for them. Let me put it that way, because you're a nice person. Yeah. So
too nice. Just kidding.
But anyway, I knew that. So Bree has talked before with me, and I know that you've shared and been pretty open about some of the story that we're about to tell. I want to just give a quick heads up to everybody listening that this is a story of violence that took place within a family. This is a story of murder and suicide, right? And just want everybody to know that going in. We've had a few guests that have come on to share some of those types of stories. And it's always an honor to hear a story. I'm especially honored this is the first time that you're sharing this in a public format with people. And to be part of that is really, really great. And part of the reason that it's great is because I know it helps people to hear these kinds of things. So I appreciate you being here.
Absolutely. And it's easy to talk to you about this because we've known each other for so long and you're in the mental health field. So it doesn't feel like I'm talking to a stranger. And the more we share our mental health struggles, like the more people realize that it's an everyday thing and a lot of people struggle with it and it helps them.
Yeah. And in particular, I know you're a big advocate for mental health and not just like, philosophically, you've helped to bring in mental health services and things to your workplace, and you work hard in your own way to make it such a positive experience, but have literally helped to facilitate therapists being contracted with the business and everything to help employees. And I just know that that's a huge thing, and I've known of the help that you've given people on a one-on-one basis too, with addiction and mental health stuff. Just huge. You're just a good person, Bree. That's what I'm trying to say.
It just comes so naturally. Those things. I'm like, is someone hurt? Let me go. Let me help them.
Exactly.
It gets better. I promise.
Well, let's, if we would start, maybe where would you like to start in telling the story and letting people know the experience that you had in your family? You can start wherever you feel is best.
My therapists say that I have complex childhood trauma and PTSD with obsessive compulsive tendencies, but not really OCD. And so I think it's appropriate to start with my childhood. Okay. And I am the youngest of 3 children. My sister was the oldest, and my brother, and then myself. And we had a mother and father, and our father was in the military. So we were privileged enough to grow up overseas in Okinawa, Japan. And we were able to travel a little bit to Guam and Tokyo and Australia and see all these wonderful places. And I call him Val, not Dad. It's he's my father, and he would always make it a point to say, "You're very privileged. A lot of children don't get to do this. You should be very lucky. Feel very lucky." And so that was kind of ingrained in us at a young age. But growing up, Val wasn't there a lot, so it was really just my mother raising 3 children within a couple of years apart. So that was a heavy burden on her. So we were always afraid of our father because he was violent. He was physically violent. He was emotionally violent and hurtful, and always told us how we weren't good enough, how we can do better, how a B or a C might as well be an F. Every report card or progress report day, he would take us all to the kitchen. We'd hand him our progress reports and our report cards. He would line us up, and my sister would always go first. And he would take out a belt. He would take out a metal or a leather belt, and he would beat us one by one. And that was a normal thing for us. Like every progress report card day, any big grades, nothing was ever good enough for him. So he would abuse us on a regular basis as children, like elementary school, middle school. I even remember in high school him slapping me across the face and telling me how it wasn't good enough. And my mother, she was present physically, but Lord only knows the abuse that she was taking in from Val. So she wasn't really there mentally. She was more of the emotionally abusive person. She rarely hit us, but she did hit me one time, and I had this huge bruise on my leg. And she said, "That wasn't me. That wasn't me. I don't know where you got that." And in my mind, I'm like 9 years old. I'm like, "But you just hit me, Mom." And so that's the kind of manipulative abuse that she did. So we had all kinds of abuse growing up, unfortunately. So that was kind of our childhood.
It's so, I mean, obviously it's invalidating. And when we say that literally, we're not just talking vaguely or intangibly invalidating, right?
Absolutely.
And there's a complication there. It strikes me that something that is so sort of mundane and normal, let's say kids that are like, oh, grades are coming out. And especially when we were younger, and it was like grades came out, you didn't know what they were every day that you could go in and check, right? But being nervous about grades, very, very different than your experience of anticipating what it was going to be like.
I had this wonderful math teacher. I went to Woodmont Middle School in South Carolina, and it was progress report day, and I was terrified. I knew I got a C in something, and that just wasn't going to be good enough. And I knew that I was going to be beat that day. So I cried, and I didn't do well in my math class. So her name is Angie. We're actually friends on Facebook, and we still keep in touch. She told me to go to the counselor and talk to them. And I said, "Hey, I'm afraid to go home because Val's going to beat me." And so they're like, "Well, what do they do? Does he just beat you with a belt? Like, it's okay if parents to beat their children." And so that kind of tore me apart. And I said, "No, he grabs my arm and it bruises my arm. And he hits me, like he hits my face. He beats me with a belt, and it's horrible." So I didn't find out until I got home. That was a little bit nicer because our middle school called the high school where my sister was. And they said, "Hey, this is what your sister said. Is this true?" And she denied everything. So that hurt. But at the same time, I understand why she did, because Val would have just lost his mind. Like we were so threatened and we were so scared to make him upset that she said, "No, that never happened. And we're okay." So again, with the not being validated and going home, I didn't get beat that day because
did he know that you had said that, or did the middle school just drop it? Okay.
Yeah, they called, and then they dropped it. And he said, "Do you really think I hurt you?" And I said, "No, Dad, of course not. Like, I know you love me." And because I was terrified of him. Mm-hmm. So I had to lie and keep lying to protect my abuser.
And then you get into where you get like the school, for example, the default position wasn't to believe you.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I know nowadays there would be a lot of requirements, and at least in most states I'm aware of, they wouldn't have had the option to not contact authorities. If a child says that, you have to call those that are trained to actually investigate that and things like that. Which the same problem exists though of that interview. You know, we tell kids, tell the truth. And everyone's here to help you, and you know all this, and it's like, well, at the end of this conversation, I'm smart enough to know you're going to leave, and I'm staying here most likely, right, in this house, and so there's very little incentive to, as you put it, for your sister. I mean, at that point particularly, it sounds like there was that feeling of here's what'll happen if we talk about it,
Absolutely.
And it's not wrong. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you're learning to do things to survive, basically.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even when we were home from school, Val and my mother, Mary, would come home after us because we took the bus home. We always rode the bus together, and we walked to our house, which was maybe like a couple 100 feet away from the bus stop. And we'd hang out, we'd have fun, but we'd also be on alert. Like if his green truck came in the driveway, we're like, he's home. Everybody, you know, pretend like you're doing your homework, do something productive. And so he doesn't get mad. Let's not irritate him. Let's not make him more upset than he usually is.
So you're not just protecting him from legal prosecution and investigation. You're also, like in that very practical way, you're also trying to safeguard his emotional life as well. We don't want him to be upset. We don't want him I mean, obviously the effect that it has on everyone, but so you're in a caretaker role to try to control the outcome as much as possible by controlling your actions. And that's a lot. I mean, that just sounds like so much pressure to be under day to day, especially as a little kid.
At 12 years old. Yeah, and younger, but this is particularly the year I was graduating middle school. So I was in 8th grade. And so that's kind of my childhood. We moved around a lot. I was really shy, and I didn't like talking to people. And my brother and sister I looked at them like parents. Like my sister was so smart. She helped me with my grades. She helped me with my reading because I was terrible at English. And my brother was so athletic. He was on cross country, did soccer, baseball, basketball. And so he taught me a little bit about sports and running, and they were always there for me. And they always protected me like my sister did, getting the worst of the beatings. And my brother told Val that he hated him, and he was kind of protecting us as much as he could.
Was he the oldest?
No, my sister was the oldest. She was 15 when she passed away, and my brother was 13 and getting ready to turn 14, and I was 12 getting ready to turn 13. Yeah.
It's very close in age. As the youngest, oftentimes people are getting more mobility and freedom as they get older, and then you get left behind, is it sometimes the feeling. You're the one at home more often. Although, did you have the option to try to be not home more? Did people try to make friends and find places, or was that even allowed in your home? I know a lot of people do that to try to stay out of the home as much as possible.
Right. Well, Val was very controlling. So people, if we wanted to have company with friends, they would have to come to our house. We had to be the house that people went to so that he can make sure everyone's doing what they're supposed to, I suppose.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So a real pressure cooker of a situation, obviously, just like, just a very, very unstable kind of thing. How you mentioned that your brother reacted by trying to overtly like protect, and he was like at odds with your dad, with Val, I should say.
He did. And that was when Val was lining us up to beat us for grades. And my brother, his name is Christian, he said, "I hate you." And so Val finished beating all of us and kept him there. And then my sister and I went to our rooms and we just heard screaming. And we knew that he was getting beat. He was getting abused because he spoke up about how he felt about him. And
what kind of came out for, what came out for you? How did you deal? What kinds of things did you learn to do to try to survive and keep some sanity throughout that?
Throughout that, I always told myself that there's someone out there that has it worse. There's someone out there that doesn't have food or clothes, or their parents hurt them worse. And like, I kept myself going by saying I'm lucky. And I have a home to live in, even though it's not great, but it could always be worse.
You feel like that's something you've carried with you? That kind of, does that belief and that thought process still something that, is that still part of your life?
Now it's something that I told myself to survive. And I know it's not the truth to an extent. Like when I tell other people what happened in my childhood, it's like their response is just overwhelmed. Like, wow, are you serious? Like that's not real. And because it was so normal for my dysfunction was normal and abuse was normal. So like, I didn't understand that normal people didn't get abused every day or told that they're worthless or not good enough. And so it is true. There are people that have it worse than I do, but I don't really compare myself anymore. I think everyone has their hardships and how they deal with it is different. And that's just how life is.
Yeah, it's the risk of comparison, right? I mean, I think there can be some benefit. And obviously in the situation you were doing, right, you were doing something that did help you in this situation. It's interesting as you've kind of maybe don't need that anymore, as a survival tool. But yeah, it is tricky about comparison because if there's people who have it worse, there's also people who have it better. And if I feel better because people have it worse, I could feel resentful because people have it better too, right? And it sounds like you also kind of got to this feeling of like, yeah, mine was pretty bad though. It's not like sitting there like, oh, people have it worse in a very general way. It's like, it's like, but on the scale, right, of experiences.
I didn't know the scale. I didn't know there was better,
Yeah.
But
did you start to figure that out?
Not really. Not until later on in like senior year, and I would write a lot. I'd write down my emotions, and I'd angry write, and I'd rip out the pages because I was afraid that they would find them. But yeah, as I got older, it just things got a lot easier and started making more sense that people were happy with their families. Their parents were there during practice and stuff. And my parents never showed up to our swim meets, to my soccer games. I never got that support from them.
Well, what happened then as things kept progressing? You guys are still moving around a lot.
Well, Val retired in New Jersey. We were stationed at McGuire Air Force Base. And so he retired and we actually moved to Greenville, South Carolina. And that was in 1998. So we lived here for a few years in this subdivision. And it was a big change. It was a new school. I was going to middle school. My siblings were going to high school now. And my sister was a junior in high school, and she was studying aeronautical engineering at a local airport. So she was amazing. She was on top of it. She was so intelligent. And she and Val had a special bond because she was the oldest, and they would always play Jeopardy together, and she would always look out for us. So she would always be there talking to Val and saying, hey, Bree tried really hard. She just has really hard time with this subject. And my brother was going into ninth grade in high school, and it was a little harder for him because so Val and my sister got along very well. And then my mother and Christian got along really well because they were funny. They'd watch the aisle together and they'd hang out, make jokes. So I always felt kind of left out. And I didn't feel like I had anyone to really talk to or rely on besides my siblings. And so I would hang out with them the most. And sometimes we would get kicked out of the house and said, leave for an hour, don't come back. Leave, don't come back until nighttime. So we would have to wander off while Val and Mary had an argument or something. So the real trauma began it's actually May 31st, 2000. This was the 24th anniversary of losing my brother and sister. It was the last day of middle school for me, last day of 8th grade. And so we were all riding the bus home as we normally do. And as we were pulling up to our bus stop, I just got this really weird feeling. And I said, I can't go home. I told my friend Ashley, I was like, I can't go home. Like something is inside of me, pushing me, telling me, do not go home. So she didn't want to go across the street and hang out at the pool with the other kids because it's summer. But I convinced her finally. And so as my brother and sister were walking home, Ashley and I and a few other friends walked across the street to the pool house to hang out. While our parents weren't home yet. They didn't get home until a little bit later, maybe like an hour or 2 hours later. And when she finally agreed to go across the street, I felt a little bit better. But then I looked at my brother who was across the street, across the bus from me. He was just looking at me like into my soul. And when I looked at him, it was like this bright white light around him. And all I saw was him and this white light. And somehow I knew, but I didn't know that it would be the last time I would see my brother alive. I don't know what that feeling was, but I remember it so clearly. And so my brother and sister, they went home. I went to the pool. We were hanging out for maybe 15 minutes. And then Ashley says, hey, did you hear the car backfire? And I said, I think so. Because it went boom, boom. It was a couple seconds away. And then I got this eerie feeling like, I got to get home. I got to get home right now. Like I'm leaving. And so Ashley walked around to her house, and I walked to my house, and I knocked on the front door and took off my shoes. I was knocking. I was like, why aren't they answering the door? Because my brother and sister were inside. I was like, gosh, they're probably just watching TV or in the room and ignoring me because I'm the youngest, right? And so after a couple of knocks and kind of muttering under my breath, I walked around the side of our house. It was a 2-story brick house. And I walked into the garage, and then I walked into our kitchen that was attached. And I put my bag on the table, and I saw that my brother's bag was on the table too. And then I saw that across from the kitchen, there was our living room, and there was a TV, but there was a couch blocking my view. But I saw my sister's legs, and I was like, hey, that TV might work better if you turn it on, joking, because she was in the living room watching TV, but the TV wasn't on, which I thought was weird. And then as I walked closer, I just had this feeling inside of me like something was wrong. And her legs were really pale. And she's a pale girl to begin with. Like she had strawberry blonde hair, beautiful, shorter than me. And I saw blood by her legs just trickle down. And then I saw the top of her covered with a blanket. And I said, oh my God, my sister is dead. So I immediately ran out of the house, and I ran to Ashley's house, her house was about one house behind us, really. And I said, my sister's dead. And she and I ran back over the house just to make sure, like, this is really happening. And so she looked and I looked, and then we ran back to her house and we called 911. But before I called 911, I called my mother because that was my instinct to call my mom, as most people would do. And so I told her, and she just started screaming. And then I said, I have to call 911. So I did. But as I was on the phone with 911, I thought, oh my God, where's my brother? Like, I didn't even look for my brother. And I just had this guilt. So I gave Ashley the phone so she can finish talking to 911. And I ran over. And as I was running over, I was just so overwhelmed that I passed out in the grass for a few seconds. And then I went into the house, and because I unlocked the front door as I originally left. And I knew he was upstairs because he wasn't downstairs. And so I walked up the stairs, and I saw this like black shadowy figure at the top of the stairs with glowing yellow eyes and a shadowy figure. And I guess that's all the pain and everything that I felt was in this figure. And I looked left where my parents' room was, and I got this sick feeling. It was a horrible, sick, gut-wrenching, wanting to throw up feeling. And I could not walk to my left because of the terror. And so I looked right. My sister's room was there, my room, and over the garage was my brother's room. And I started walking towards his room. And about halfway through, I looked and I saw his eyes open. I just saw his blue eyes open looking at me, but he was not alive. I didn't know what happened. I didn't see any blood. I was hyper-focused on his eyes. And so I ran out of the house, and as I left, my mother pulled up. And she ran inside, and I said, they're dead. They're dead. Like, there's his skull right there. It is on the windowsill. That's his skull. And I was trying to keep it together, but at the same time, I was trying to process what happened. So she ran inside, and she picked up the blanket over that was covering my sister, and she saw her very pale blue eyes. And then she dropped the blanket. And at 12 years old, I picked up my mother and I drug her outside, and I said, you don't want to go back in there. So I drug her outside while she was screaming and crying, and the neighbors were starting to gather, and I sat her down in her car. And then the police showed up. I said, they're inside. Is there anyone in there? I don't know. I don't know if there's anyone else in there. So I had to physically carry my mother out. And then Val came home shortly after the police were there, and they were like, don't go in there. Don't tamper with the evidence. We got to make sure it's clear. But he went in there and he touched things and he ruined evidence. And he did everything he wasn't supposed to do. And at that time, a police therapist or someone started to talk to me because I was so young and this just happened. And they're like, are you okay? Like, what happened? And I told them, and then Val just kept interrupting, and the police actually threatened to arrest him because he was acting so erratically. And I barely got any counseling because he wouldn't let me or let them talk to me after that horrific incident.
And you were having to actually play a real parenting role, especially before he got there, right? With your mom, which you already were, all of you were having to do that. But that strikes me as in the moment. I mean, even if someone's actually a parent, that's a terrible job. That's a terrible burden. Now to be a 12-year-old who's like, here's the person who should be doing this for me, who should be picking me up and taking me out of the house, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So I had to, it just naturally kicked in. Like, I have to take care of her. She's not okay. And I'm just making sure that she doesn't see my brother. And thank God she didn't. Val saw both of them. And so we weren't allowed home for a little while. And actually for a long time, we weren't allowed to go back into the house. So we lived with friends, and we lived in like this extended stay place for a long time. And throughout that time, we got news about what happened and what really went on or what weapons were used. And my brother they found his books from school, and it was written, "I'm going to kill my sister." And there was a suicide note. He didn't say sisters. He said sister. We knew that he meant Angelina was my sister's name, because they fought the most, probably because Val gave her more attention. And I mean, I can go on with speculations, but the fact is, my brother had some kind of mental health issue, but my parents never chose to recognize it. They never helped him. They never talked to him. Val would always say, "Don't cry. Put down your emotions. Don't cry. I don't want to see you cry." So we were never allowed to have these big emotions, or really any emotions.
Well, then there's a risk for an abuser, a perpetrator of abuse, right? I mean, even having you talk to teachers was a risk, right? And so, and in therapy, and as I've worked in the field, it's always there's kind of red flag when someone's like, "I won't allow my children to go to therapy," or "I'll be super controlling about what is said in therapy." It's always because who is it that doesn't want their child to openly express themselves, right? I mean, there's something to hide there. And it sounds like it goes even deeper, the sickness, the toxicity there with him, that you shouldn't even have those feelings, it sounds like.
Yeah. And it wasn't until recently that I realized that my brother was troubled. So my brother ended up killing my sister with a sledgehammer and knives, and he stabbed her, and it was fast. The coroner said that she did not suffer. So he killed her, and then he went into my parents' room, where I just had the sick feeling of not being able to go. And we had a gun cabinet. I didn't know that the safe, I don't know where the key was. Like, I didn't know anything, but apparently Val told my brother where it was. So he was able to locate the guns, and there was a shotgun, and then there was, I don't know anything about guns, but there were a couple of them there. And he was in my parents' room with these weapons, and I was across the street. So I don't know if he was waiting for me to come home or just waiting for Val to come home. I will never know. That's what the car backfiring was, because the weapon went off in my parents' bedroom twice. So at some point he went into his room and he wrote a suicide note saying, "I'm sorry. And tell Brie I'm sorry." And he ended up shooting himself and killing himself. And that's where everything just kind of halted. And I was forced to grow up even more than I had to. And Val said, "We're a triangle now. We have the strongest structure. Triangle's the strongest. And we have each other now." And that just, I did not understand.
Well, that sounds scarier, actually. I mean, with the other 2 points of the triangle in particular. I mean, there's no mystery about them being unstable and unsafe people. And then you're left with them. I mean, it's hard enough for people when someone moves away, like a sibling moves out of the house or something. And this was, you have the added complexity of the trauma of the loss, right?
Absolutely. And I wasn't allowed to talk about it. I wasn't allowed to talk about what happened to anyone. My parents wouldn't talk to me about it for a long time, except Val would tell me, "Hey, this is what they found, and your brother did kill your sister, and this is what the coroner found." He was telling me at 12 years old, because my mother, quote, couldn't handle it. So he was telling me all this stuff, and I was trying not to have any emotions because I wasn't allowed to. I wasn't allowed to be sad. And I was put into counseling, but it wasn't effective because I didn't have a good counselor. Like, I would type things for her because she, in session, instead of talking about what happened, it didn't work. And then they would send me to this camp for grief and loss. And so they'd go about losing a child. And I went with the kids, and they're like, "I lost a parent," or "I lost a dog." And I'm the only one that's like, "Hey, I lost my brother and sister." And so I could not relate to a single person. I couldn't tell anyone how I felt because I was numb for so long. I was never able to process anything that happened for about 15 years.
And it strikes me that Val is using the opportunity to talk to you as something therapeutic. In other words, he may not have called it that, but he needed someone to talk to, and he's putting you in once again, in the caretaker role of listening to him, but you're not allowed to share anything, right? There's a real double standard there. And well, I'm curious too, when there's various reasons that it's hard to talk about different things. And I'm curious, did you find that the reactions people had, if you did talk about it with the element of murder and suicide being involved, I don't know, did you get poor reactions, basically? I'm just thinking there's a couple different flavors of bad reactions I know people get when they talk about those things. But
yeah, a lot of people, when you say suicide, people don't understand it. They shut down or they don't want to say the wrong thing. So what they end up doing is not saying anything. A lot of our family came to the funeral, and then that was it. I didn't hear from anybody. So I was isolated from my family and my extended family because no one wanted to upset Val. Val didn't want to talk about it. And so I had no one to really talk to. And then when I told friends, and it was at that time still super difficult for me to talk about, like, my brother, they were like, hey, the common questions when you meet somebody, hey, where do you live? And do you have any siblings? And for a long time, I would say no, and I would lie. And then I'd say, you know what? I did have siblings, but they're dead or they passed away. And all they can say is, I'm sorry. And that's the end of the conversation because they don't want to take it to another level, or they want to know everything because they're curious, not for your mental sake or how can I help you kind of thing.
Yeah. And there is with things, there's a response people have, almost this like titillating response of like, ooh, something that is new or different or something that is. And I mean, honestly, it's one of the reasons, although there's some ethical, more journalistic people out there, I'm not trying to take a shot. I've interviewed some people who do technically true crime documentary style podcasts, but I think one of the downsides of a lot of that out there is that there's treating tragedy as entertainment, right? And kind of things. And people are like, ooh, I want to know more. And it's like, why? Why do you want to know more? Is it because you love me and want to help
me? For you or for me, right. Or because you're trying to help me?
Like, yeah. Or is it,
bringing back trauma?
Yeah. And then many people have said that the worst possible response is saying nothing at all. I don't know if that's your experience. You've had such probably different reactions. I don't know if that's, but I've heard people say that when it comes to grief is like, boy, somebody saying, I'm sorry, and clumsily saying, I don't know what to say is better than somebody not saying anything.
Absolutely. And then just not talking to you. So no aunts or uncles or anyone. And then just feeling alone in the time of grief and not being able to process anything was the worst thing that could have happened afterwards. Yeah.
So you mentioned that it was a good 15 years of just trying to survive with the tools that were not given to you, and basically the all of those limitations in your life. What happened to where you started to I don't know. Is it fair to say started to heal? Is that that chapter, that still part of the process, or was it more just pulling it out first or whatever?
Well, Val made us move back into the house that they were murdered in. So we lived there for, a long time. And so
on the audio track here, you may not have heard the face I just made, but I was, I had a visceral reaction to that. My word.
Yeah, they painted and they put new furniture in there, but Val made us live in that home, the murder house, until I graduated from high school. And I said, I can't do this anymore. I started having dissociative episodes. And then in these episodes, I said, I'm just going to kill myself if I have to stay here. And I have no recollection of this because my brain was split. And so I ran away after high school. And then I moved to Virginia. And I was angry for so long at Val. I was just angry at everything. And one day I said, I don't want to be angry anymore. And so I found a counselor that I really liked, and I started seeing her because I said, I deserve better. I don't deserve to have to carry this. I deserve to live a happy life like everybody else. And I am so tired of being angry all the time. And that was the start of it. And then I was in counseling for a long time with a PTSD therapist, and it still wasn't enough. I still had a lot of anxiety and just pain, and I couldn't process things. And so I got on some medication that helped a lot. And then eventually I had to go to a different therapist because I kind of like grew out of this one. And so I'm still in therapy for EMDR and to help kind of reprogram the trauma and being able to not be triggered as much. And finally, after 24 years, being able to process what happened and someone to help me instead of saying, it's okay, I'm sorry, but, live your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How have you found that, the EMDR? I mentioned a lot on here, and it's some of the more modern trauma approaches involve some of these more, I like to think it was just more emotionally focused, because they're basically like, one of the best things I find is it gets you out of your head a little bit. It's like, I'm not trying to sit here and talk myself out of my trauma. I'm actually having an emotional experience and processing that in session rather than, at least that's what I find. How have you found it to be?
Oh gosh, absolutely. So there was this one time I wasn't allowed to celebrate holidays, and especially not Christmas after my brother and sister passed, because my father said that we weren't allowed to celebrate it if they weren't there. So one year we went to Tennessee, and I was playing with someone else in the lobby, and then I heard screaming, "Bree, where are you?" And then I opened the elevator, and he was there, and we were playing Uno. And I had this Uno box in my hand, and there were about 100 mission kids out there for Christmas. And he started hitting me in the face and beating me in front of everyone. And so I took the Uno box and I knelt down and I just did a child's position, just curled up in pain. And so to this day, I have a really hard time playing Uno. Like, I physically cannot do it. So EMDR has been so great. It's like tapping left, right. And then it's kind of like an outer body. You go to that scenario and it's bad, but you bring it to a level that you can deal with. And then you get worse. And so you kind of like acclimate to those feelings so that you can deal with them and it's not as traumatic. So although I cannot play Uno yet, I can hold the box. Wow. And so it's a process. And so that's just one of the examples that EMDR I have benefited from it.
It's another little thing, by the way, reminds me, like with the grades, people don't think about all the things that can be triggering out there for complex trauma. People walking around and being like, and just struck me like Uno, that's another one. That's everywhere. It's Uno all around.
Yeah.
I think I have a deck here in the office somewhere,
right. And every time I see it, I'm like, oh my God, that's a Tennessee incident. And it brings everything back.
And so then with the processing it differently as you're doing through the EMDR. Yeah. I'm really glad to hear your experience with it and your take on it. 'Cause I always, it can be researched as much as they want to do it and all that. But I always prefer to talk to people who have had the experience of having something and then seeing if it works. So it is making a difference. That's something you'd put out there for trauma recovery for people. Yeah.
With someone that's trained, like right now I'm doing it virtually because my therapist is virtual, and I find it just as beneficial as being in person. So as long as someone's trained in it properly, it's very beneficial for those who have any kind of trauma, really.
Yeah. What would you say are some of those other elements that have allowed you to get into that recovery mode and healing from these things?
Kind of taking time for yourself, trying to figure out who you are by what helped me was helping others and seeing how other people live. Like I did mission work in Romania and Jamaica, and just seeing that, you know what, people do have it worse, but that's their situation. And this is my situation. And I found writing has been very helpful, or exercise, and to get out of that way of thinking, like everything's bad. You take things by a moment. And if you have something happy, you just stretch out that moment like putty, and you stay in that moment for as long as you can. And staying present has been really beneficial. Which is incredibly difficult to do when you're upset or you're triggered.
Oh,
it's a lot of work.
particularly when you have a lot of trauma and like a disassociation experience and things, it's very hard to stay in the moment because I'm not really here right now.
Yeah.
I'm busy. My brain is busy over here, disassociating, right? And so trying to pull that in, it takes a lot of practice for that. And with meditation as well as just mindfulness, like you're saying, people stop doing it because it takes a while to get to the point where it actually starts helping while I'm doing it, instead of I'm practicing doing it until it helps. I think it's like physical exertion, exercise that way as well, right? It's like, it takes a while to get into the condition where I start this and it feels better, right?
And you stick with it. Like we do the 1, 2, 3, name one thing you can see and describe it. 2, name 2 things you can feel, and name 3 things you can hear. And that kind of brings you back to where you need to be so that you can handle what's happening in the moment, which is, it's a lot of training and it's really hard work. But if you stick with it, like you will find yourself on the other side. And that's where you want to be. It's where I want to be.
How did you find approaching what you bring into like your parenting and stuff? Because one thing that stands out to me, having got to know you guys, is that you and Robert are just such cool people, but just like really, really caring parents. And that carries through the way you relate to each other, the way you relate to your kids. I'm impressed with the way you guys do that. But was that hard to approach?
It was. Being able to be vulnerable with somebody, to be able to marry them, was incredibly difficult. But he broke down my walls, and when we had our first son, I felt so guilty, like I wasn't good enough to be a parent. I'm going to be just like my parents, and I felt like maybe we should put him up for adoption. But then I stuck with it, and then we had a daughter, and I always said I don't want to be like my parents, and my therapist said, because of that alone, you're not going to be like your parents. And unfortunately, there's going to be generational trauma, but you can do this. And I just love my kids so much. And I know they deserve a lot, and I want to give them what they deserve. Not necessarily everything I didn't have, because that can be a lot, like a lot of spoiling. Then we have like rotten children, but I'm very honest with them. Like, you know what? The world isn't great. This is the reality, but it is what you make it. And I'm here to help you in any way possible.
Well, it's never something, I don't think we ever have to. Some people maybe do. I don't think we ever have to get to a point where we're like, oh, this is good. This is worth it somehow for the strengths I've developed. I don't know. That isn't comforting to a lot of people, that concept. But I think the concept is true that there are strengths that we do gain from going through something, as long as we had to go through it anyway, and it sounds like you are bringing those strengths to the table with your kids. I mean, it's very hard to teach kids, the world, is scary a lot of times, and there's these bad things out there. And you're like, but I mean, you're bringing the strength of having had to deal with that for a longer amount of time, that knowledge, than maybe many people have, right?
Yeah. And there's beauty in this world. There's beauty in people, and it's there. You just have to be open enough to receive it or to see it.
You said that when your journey into healing and therapy and those things, when that started, you were tired of being mad all the time. How are you feeling now? Are you feeling like you're not as mad anymore?
Yeah, I feel really great. I feel like I'm able to be happy and find joy in things. Sometimes it's hard during their anniversary because my sister's birthday is May 7th. The anniversary of their passing is May 31st, and my brother's birthday is June 12th. So during that period, the anticipation of those 30 plus days is so hard. And I find myself getting irritable, getting short. But then I remind myself, hey, you've been through a lot. It's understandable. And you're going to be okay because you do this every year. So I don't get angry. Almost, it takes a lot to make me angry. And when it comes to my kids, like I will mama bear anybody, but generally, like I'm happy and I love people, and communicating just brings me so much joy.
Well, I'm so grateful to hear the story, and just to see what you've done with this experience and what you've used from it. And I'm glad to hear about the recovery aspects too. There's certain terms that get thrown around nowadays. A lot of people know a bit about therapy here and there, and some of them have become almost cliches. So they say, "Oh, am I a victim of something?" Yes, and then I become a survivor, and then I become a thriver. Hopefully, from survive to thrive, and it rhymes. Which in the world of therapy, we love things that rhyme. They're easy to remember. It's not always just because you can, put them on a pamphlet or something, but, but it's a real thing. And when you see it, I think it's easy to fall into the clichéness of that and just say like, oh, everybody's a thriver. And I think that takes away a little bit from the suffering that's there of saying we are not always thriving. But to say that you've really put yourself into that true mode of saying, I'm not just going to survive. I want to be happy. I want to thrive. I want to, and then choosing to then be this mom and wife and part of your culture and community, or your community rather, around you, it's very impressive. It's something to be very proud of.
Yeah. And thriving, it's like, yeah, I thrive, but not every day. Sometimes I just have a really hard time. And unfortunately, when you have trauma and you have loss, or you have, mental illness, you're not going to have a good day every day, and you're not going to thrive every day, and you're not going to suffer every day either, but you're going to get through it and it'll be better at the end.
Well, thank you so much again. Really grateful. I do like to, as you know, you've heard me do this. I like to give everybody a chance to mention a way of giving back around them. And it could be, so you're going to be good at this one. It can be like a charity that you love. It can be just a good practice that you like to do, or that you've seen that you think is a cool thing for people to do. A way of giving, just a way of connecting with that community.
Yeah. Well, I am a part of Let's Chat podcast on Facebook. So if you ever want to chat, tell me your story, connect, I'm there. And I like the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I donate there as often as I can. And what else? I'm really into the Let's Chat community. You can find it on Let's Chat podcast community on Facebook with Chris Revill, and I'm out there.
It's a great community of people. I mean, it really is. And, for those that are sharing or are just interested in the storytelling and the things that go into podcasting, you and Chris, and I'll say me too. I've tried to be helpful here and there, but always tried to give people that chance to have that accessibility. We used to do the live interviews of people who had podcasts on the YouTube as well.
Let's Chat Live.
For a while, but so that's something.
We'll pick that back up
there. People can still find that. Yeah. And so, And I'd say, and hit us up too, if you are someone who's in that storytelling sphere or would like to be too. I mean, that's the thing that, I'll just say that's a way of giving back that I think those of us in the podcasting world do like to do as well. And as you know, I love stories on here and love to hear anybody's stories. You can always hit me up at dwighthurst.com/contact, or you can email me at dwighthurst@gmail.com. just a couple of things real quick. If you do want to hit on the podcast or the website rather, the podcast we're planning the third annual live event for the end of August for opioid overdose awareness. It's International Opioid Overdose Awareness Day at the end of August. And so more information will be coming out about that. And as always, there'll be a link where people can not only watch or listen through the social media channels, but the link will allow you to actually join the show live as well, that you can have your audio or your video both to join the show. And so that link will be coming out about a week before, because that's when StreamYard lets you pre-plan a link. But there will be, that'll be on the website as well. And so people can do that. We've been highlighting a charity every month, and also donating when people join the Patreon, whatever our highlight charity is in that month. They'll basically, that 50% of their donation will go there, or you can go straight to the place and donate if that's what you choose to do as well. But you can do to share those as well. This is July, and we're going to be focused on the nonprofit organization Munchausen Support. You can go to munchausensupport.com. I had a guest on earlier in the month, Andrea Dunlop, who does a podcast around medical abuse, known as Munchausen by proxy syndrome. There's not a lot of organizations out there for support, but theirs is one where if you have that experience or would like to get involved in trying to figure out ways to help support kids who have been through that type of abuse, then that's a good place for you to go to learn more about that. And it is one of the only ones I'm aware of that does that. That's why I decided to highlight it this month.
Wow.
So, all right, Bree. Well, thank you again so much. And thank you everybody for listening, being part of it. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Court and Parts Podcast Network. To listen to more Court and Parts shows, visit courtandarts.com.
Hello. I am so glad you're here. Welcome to the To Mom is to Love podcast. My name is Valerie Probstfeld. I am a nurse practitioner as well as an imperfect mom who loves. In fact, I thought I would be an A-plus mother before becoming a mom. However, as the years passed, I realized love is the only thing I can control. In fact, the verb to mother means to love. Merriam-Webster defines to mom as to give birth or rise, as well as to care for or protect. And just think about it. Love gives birth, allows ourselves and families to rise, and enables us to care for and protect. We have more power as moms than we realize. In 5 generations from now, you will have approximately 30 descendants, and the number keeps getting larger and larger. Motherhood is the most important job in the world. Our mission is to support, encourage, and empower each other as imperfect moms to love as a verb. Come join us as we navigate our shared name, live our verb, and rediscover our identity. Please subscribe, share, and follow. And I would love it if you leave a review so more moms can come join us. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, as well as TikTok and YouTube. Please follow along with us on this beautiful journey we call motherhood.